The psychologist Jordan Peterson was recently on the Jubilee channel to debate 20 atheists, and since the episode was originally billed as 20 atheists versus 1 Christian, it's understandable that a lot of Christians were disappointed to see Peterson taking explicitly non-Christian positions in this debate. After all, Peterson has never really claimed to be a Christian, so having him represent Christianity in this exchange certainly seemed like a missed opportunity to share the gospel with an audience which may have never heard a compelling intellectual case for Christianity. That being said, there was one point that Peterson brought up during this debate that I actually thought was quite good, and something that Christians could really do well to have a grasp on when speaking with people who don't think that the existence of God can be rationally known. And in order to unpack what this point is, I want to turn to the moment in the debate where Peterson first brought it up, which happens about halfway through his defense of his claim that everybody worships something, even atheists. In particular, Peterson raised his point in response to an atheist who tried to run a reductio ad absurdum, or a reduction to absurdity argument against Peterson's claim, resulting in this exchange.
Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand.
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
And now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition...
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
When I was first watching this debate, this moment really caught my attention because I'm a Catholic myself, and I'm pretty familiar with how Catholics understand the reverence that they give to Mary. I've heard many Catholic apologists answer the question of whether Catholics worship Mary by saying that it all depends on your definition of worship. After all, there's different ways that the term worship has been used in the past. In more modern usage, worship often refers specifically to the highest possible honor, or the kind of honor that's due really only to the highest being. Catholics obviously don't worship Mary in this sense, since we give that kind of honor only to God. But there's also another, more ancient sense of the term worship, one that understands worship simply as a word referring to the giving of due honor to a thing. Under this definition of worship, to worship something doesn't imply that you're treating it as God, just that you believe that this thing has some kind of dignity that needs to be recognized. Think of medieval kings and how they were sometimes addressed as your worship. That title didn't suggest that the medievals thought of their kings as gods. It was just a recognition of a kind of dignity in the kingly office. In this sense, anything could be given worship as long as that worship was proportionate to the intrinsic value of the thing being honored. And what's really interesting about this exchange is that Jordan Peterson appeals to this older, more nuanced meaning of worship in it. He says that he understands worship as coming in a hierarchy, with some things being more worthy of honor than others, and says that worship is just the act of rendering to something the honor that is due to it. But if worship for Peterson comes in a hierarchy, and if worship is just about honoring and valuing something in accordance with its worth, then that means that the worthiness of things comes in a hierarchy. Some things have more intrinsic worth than other things. And this goes really well with an ancient idea found in both Christian thought and ancient Greek philosophy, the hierarchy of being. For philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, and Thomas Aquinas, being, or existence, being real, wasn't just something that a thing either had or didn't have with no in-between. Instead, there was a hierarchy of beings, with some existing things being more substantial and real than other things. At the top of this hierarchy was God. He's the one that exists the most. Below him were the angels. Below them were human beings, then non-rational animals, then plants, then finally non-living things like rocks and dirt. The further up the hierarchy you went, the more beingful or inherently valuable a thing became. And as you went down the hierarchy, things became closer to non-being, to nothing. So a human being is inherently more valuable than a rock. A rock is less valuable than a plant, but a human being is more valuable than a plant. That's how the hierarchy worked. And this hierarchy could be subdivided too. Some animals, like dolphins, were more substantial than other animals, like ants, because they could do things that ants couldn't. Some human beings, like the saints, were raised up higher on the hierarchy through extraordinary virtue. So what you end up with is a view of the world with a wide array of different kinds of beings, which all have different levels of honor due to them in accordance with their different ontological statuses, their different levels of being. And now, if you remember, I said at the beginning of this video that this point that Peterson seems to raise would be helpful for doing Christian apologetics. Here's where I make good on that promise. You see, in his great work, the Summa Theologica, St. Thomas Aquinas famously offered 5 arguments for the existence of God. One of these arguments, the fourth way, explicitly appeals to this notion of the hierarchy of being and says that when we digest what it really means for things to exist in a hierarchy of different levels of being, it logically entails the existence of God. Let me try to summarize the basic thrust of that argument. We know that some kind of hierarchy of being is true, because it's just common sense that some things are more objectively valuable than others. I mean, are we really going to say that a human being isn't more valuable than a rat or a termite colony? But if there's a real hierarchy of being, any kind of hierarchy of being, then there must be a standard for being. You can't say that one thing has more being than another without having a clear standard for what being is. You can't say that a human being is more valuable than a rock unless there's something by which we judge what's valuable and what's not. But what could possibly be an objective standard for being? What could possibly serve as our measuring stick for determining whether something has a lot of being or not? Well, being, of course. Being itself, removed and abstracted from all those particular cases of things that have being and looked at in isolation, just as being itself. But how exactly does this notion of being itself exist? Is it just an abstract concept in the mind? Well, if that was the case, it couldn't really be objective, because it could be changed by the mind if it's just a concept in the mind. Instead, there must be something outside the mind which is being itself and can serve as our standard when we say that certain things have more or less being. Something to say whether or not our minds are right when we say whether something has being or not. So, there exists an extra-mental thing whose very nature just is to be, whose essence just is being, pure and simple. What else can we say about this thing? If this thing's very nature is being, well then obviously it can't lack any being. This means that it must be infinite. It must have all possible being. That also means that it can't change, because to change is to lose some kind of being and to gain another kind of being. And you can't lose or gain being if you're just being. And if this thing can't change, it also must be outside of time, since time measures change, and not made up of physical matter, since physical matter is always and ever changing. And since this thing is pure being itself, it must exist at the very top of the being hierarchy. And when we say that anything else has being, we're recognizing that that thing resembles this thing, which is pure being itself. Everything, in other words, participates in this thing insofar as it has being, borrowing its being from this one infinite being itself. So this real-world, infinite, timeless, immaterial, pure being thing exists in everything that exists, but is not any of those things. Because if it was, those things would have to be pure being, which they obviously aren't, because they're not infinite, and they're not immaterial, and they're not outside of time if they're in this world. And if you're at all familiar with the classical Christian conception of God as an infinite, timeless, immaterial being who is present in all his creation and yet not confined by any of it, this will probably all start sounding pretty familiar to you. And in fact, when you start breaking down what other attributes this being itself thing must have in order to truly be a standard for the hierarchy of being by which we can judge whether a thing has a certain amount of being or not, it starts looking even more like the classical Christian notion of God. But I don't want to go into all the details here. I'm hoping to write something on Aquinas' fourth way in the near future, and I suspect I'll probably be releasing a long video on this topic in the next several months, because this is probably one of my favorite arguments for God. So if I piqued your interest with this quick summary of the argument, I recommend you subscribe to my channel to get notified when this longer analysis of the fourth way comes out. But for now, back to Jordan Peterson. Obviously, I don't think that Dr. Peterson was thinking about the fourth way when he brought up the notion of hierarchy. He's probably never heard of it, and if he has, he probably would have some objections to it. Yet, it seems like he stumbled upon one of the major premises of this argument entirely unaware and found himself trying to articulate it to atheists. And I take this as a sign that Peterson, even if he clearly isn't a Christian, has started to pick up more of a Christian metaphysics than people may give him credit for, while still coming across as an agnostic on the question of a literal existence of a creating God. He appears to have implicitly accepted some of the premises that form the basis for some of the oldest arguments for the existence of God. This gives me, at least, hope that maybe a conversation between Peterson and 20 atheists could look very different years from now. All we can do for now is pray that Peterson has the intellectual clarity to see where his positions take him and the courage to follow the truth where it leads him. Then perhaps he might finally be a good representative for Christianity. Whatever you think of Jordan Peterson and the Fourth Way, I hope you'll consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel to help it grow. Thanks for watching, and God bless.